This week on The Watchman, it marked a turning point in Israel's rebirth as a nation, and Bible-believing Christians played a major role. The legendary Balfour Declaration is marking its 100-year anniversary, and we head to London to learn how it still matters today for Israel, for the church, and for you.
I believe that we do have an opportunity this year to basically reset the whole agenda concerning Israel and the church.
Plus, hear the amazing story of how one group of 19th century American Christians felt the tug of Zion and settled in the Holy Land against overwhelming odds. It's The Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel only on TBN. And welcome to The Watchman. Folks, we are in a season right now of incredible milestones when it comes to Israel. We're getting closer to 2018, which will mark the 70-year anniversary of Israel's miraculous rebirth as a nation. That's right, 70 years since Israel's incredible victory in its 1948 War for Independence. Now that is going to be a very significant anniversary, but we've also got two other major milestones that we're celebrating in 2017. This is Jerusalem's Jubilee year, the 50-year anniversary of Israel's recapture of Jerusalem, its ancient and ancestral capital during the Six-Day War. And if that wasn't enough, 2017 also marks the 100-year anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. It's an event you might not have heard of, yet it marked a major turning point in the Jewish people's struggle to return to their ancient homeland. In 1917, as World War I was raging, the British government announced its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in what's today known as Israel. The declaration was addressed to the leader of Britain's Jewish community and was signed by Britain's Foreign Secretary at the time, Lord Alfred Balfour. In it, Balfour wrote, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object." Now, this letter became known as the Balfour Declaration. Why was it so important? Think about it, folks. This was 1917, a time when anti-Semitism was rampant and the Jewish immigrants that were arriving in Israel were being constantly harassed. Then along comes Lord Balfour, a top official for one of the world's most powerful countries, Great Britain. Balfour, who was a Bible-believing Christian, declares that, yes, Britain fully supports the Jewish people's efforts to reestablish their ancient nation in the land that God gave them. To have that kind of backing from the British government was a major breakthrough for the Zionist movement. Now, it took 31 more years before the dream of Israel finally became a reality in 1948, and there were many twists and turns along the way, including the British government, sadly, not living up to the promises it made to the Jewish people. Still, the Balfour Declaration stands as one of the defining moments in Israel's modern history. I recently spent time in London with Roy Thurley, an expert on the Declaration, who's hosting a major Balfour anniversary event in London. He shared the incredible role that Lord Balfour and his fellow Christians in the British government played in this pivotal turning point for Israel's rebirth. Take a look. We are here at a very significant point in history. It's obviously the 50-year anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem, the Jerusalem Jubilee. But Roy, you are focused on another very, very significant anniversary right now, the 100-year anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. Now, for the average person at home may never have heard of the Balfour Declaration, tell us what it is and why this anniversary is so important.
It said that the British government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Goes on with a bit more text, but that's basically the outline of it. A national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
And why was that so important?
It was important because it was the first time that anybody had actually recognized that the Jewish people needed a homeland. Any state, that had actually recognized that. Now, it had been a process to get that far. It had taken some months, years to get that far to where the Balfour Declaration was ready to be agreed. Yeah. So if we move on to the First World War, that wasn't going well for Britain in 1915, 1916. And Herbert Asquith, who was the Prime Minister at the time, he actually stood down, and they brought in a new Prime Minister, which was David Lloyd George. And because the war wasn't going well on the Western Front, they decided, therefore, to do something different. So they decided to attack Beersheba in the south. They took Beersheba in one day. And that happened on the afternoon of October the 31st, 1917. On that same afternoon, the British War Cabinet met and agreed the text of the Balfour Declaration. Whereas the battle, if that had taken place before the declaration, it would have been, well, we've got land, but what are we going to do with it? But the two things came together on the same day.
What was the reaction around the world? I'm sure the Jews around the world were excited by this, I would think, encouraged, maybe cautiously optimistic, considering the history of the Jewish people. But how about the Arab nations? How about just the nations at large? How did they react to the Balfour Declaration?
Okay, well, the Jewish people certainly reacted very positively towards this, obviously. In Palestine, there was a very strong reaction from the Arabs against the Balfour Declaration. The Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, he instigated riots against the British, 1920, to protest about the Balfour Declaration and the Zionist project, if you like. And actually, the British government helped him in these riots, in a sense. I mean, they were sympathetic towards that. Yeah. So it really was not very good.
The Jewish state was miraculously reborn in 1948, an act of God, and the events were really set in motion that day with the Battle of Beersheba and especially the Balfour Declaration. Now, let's bring it up to the modern day. We're celebrating the 100-year anniversary of this incredible declaration, a turning point in the rebirth of Israel. Tell us what you're doing now here in the UK to commemorate it.
Here in the UK, we're going to be having a major celebration here in London at the Royal Albert Hall, when we will be remembering all the events that have happened in the past and celebrating the fact that Israel is now a state, that the mandate became the state which is what it was meant to be. And so we will be celebrating that with the Jewish community as well. So it's going to be a great event here in London, 7th of November. And you can find out all the details on our website, which is balfour100.org. And have a look at that, and you will find out all the details. But as well as here in London, we know that there are going to be other events in other parts of the country. So, for example, Manchester is key. Why? Because that's where Balfour met Watchman. That's where it all started in.
And a large Jewish population today.
And it's got a large Jewish population. So they're going to be having events happening in Manchester. We also know of events happening in Cardiff, in Scotland, in Belfast, Leeds, other places around the country where there are going to be commemorations of the Centenary of the Balfour Declaration.
And Roy, talk about this. This is exciting to hear that, because in the UK there have been rising levels of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activity. How could the Balfour Declaration celebration here, the 100-year anniversary, how could this kind of be a counterweight to that and maybe open people's eyes that, hey, Israel's not such a bad place by any means, and the Jewish people are a blessing to this country and to the world?
I believe that we do have an opportunity this year to basically reset the whole agenda concerning Israel and the church. Obviously the Jewish community are delighted the fact that Christians are actually doing this. Many of them are astonished that we're doing something like this because they don't know of the Christian support that they actually do have. So I think in terms of Jewish-Christian relationships, this is a wonderful opportunity to make a huge impact in Britain. But I also think it's an opportunity to make a huge impact on the church, which largely doesn't understand it.
Roy, thank you so much. Good luck in November with the event.
Thank you.
Hey, we're in the shadow of the Royal Albert Hall right now. We're at the famous Royal Albert Hall Memorial, a beautiful place here in London with a great history. Roy, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you indeed. Bless you.
God bless you.
Thank
you too. Thanks again to Roy Thurley for joining us and bringing attention to an important milestone in Israel's history. If you're anywhere near London on November 7th, be sure to attend the big Balfour 100 event at the legendary Royal Albert Hall for what I know will be an amazing celebration of God's people and God's land. Well, coming up after the break, American Christians have a long history of supporting Israel, even longer than you might think. We pay a visit to the ancient Israeli port city of Jaffa to learn about Israel's historic American colony. This is another amazing story that you will not hear anywhere else. Don't move.
Israel faces growing threats on all sides. Hezbollah, ISIS, Iran, and Hamas never cease their attacks. But God has raised Kufi up at this moment in history to stand between Israel and those who seek to destroy the Jewish state.
Israel's enemies are on the move. As dark clouds gather on the horizon, tell the world you proudly stand with Israel. Be a courageous voice for biblical unity and moral clarity when you join Christians United for Israel. Show your love for the people of Zion with this beautiful symbol of unending support for Israel.
Wear the pin and join Kufi, a movement of over 3.5 million defenders of Israel. Call the number on your screen or visit kufi.org/pin to receive your free pin that will show your proud support for the special bond between Israel and America.
Welcome back. American Christians might be Israel's greatest friends in the world today, and this special relationship dates back to a time even before Israel's founding. In the year 1866, a group of Christian Zionists from the state of Maine traveled to the Holy Land and established what became known as the American Colony. I recently traveled to the site of the American Colony in Jaffa, where I spent time with Gene Carter, who's keeping the memory of those pioneering American Christian Zionists alive today. Special thanks to tour guide and museum manager Maria Botto for all of her help in arranging our fascinating tour of the Maine Friendship House in Jaffa. Take a look. Hi, Gene.
Hey, it's Eric. How are you?
Yes, very
Welcome.
nice to meet you. I'm great. Thank you
Welcome.
so much. Yeah, so 1866.
Yes, welcome this little corner in the American colony in Jaffa.
Yeah.
This very unusual house here.
Yeah,
It's
so
a
I've
wooden
heard.
house. It was brought from Maine on a ship, the Nellie Chapin, 150 years ago.
Well, we are at the 150th anniversary, Gene.
Yes.
Of this amazing place.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'd like to tell you the whole story. You'd like to come in?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's do it.
This is in a unique place.
Okay.
We have a cellar, and if you'd like to open the door for me.
Sure.
He was an accomplished preacher. He was a Shakespearean actor as well, which means he had a very good memory, and he memorized the Bible. And so the scriptures that he knew from the Bible talk about the promised land for the Jewish people. And in his prayers and his preaching, he was always saying, the seed of Judah will come back to the promised land. And it's a desolate place, but God will bless it. And the former and the latter rains are coming back, and God will bless it to make the land fruitful. So they realized that it wasn't that way at that time. And why? Because there was no modernization here at all. And he felt that with the people of Maine being very industrious people and hardworking people, and they have a spark of adventure about them. So he preached that he could put together a group of people and charter a ship and buy the house kits, put them on board, and come over here and help out. In the end, there were 35 families, and quite a few of them were related to each other. in some way or another. We counted one time about 48 out of 157 were 12 or under. So they were young families. The family that had this house, for example, had 4 children. The Nellie Chapin was a brand new vessel. So it was built nearby in Addison. It's still a place where people build boats today, by the way. There's a high tide, so you can build a boat and have the tide come up and take it out. They brought it around to Machiasport, and then they sailed the Nellie Chapin over to Jonesport and took a couple of weeks or so to get everybody on board and all of their things, and sailed off from there August 11, 1866. We just passed the 150th anniversary of the sailing of the Nellie Chapin. The entire voyage was 42 days, so they landed here on October 22, 1866.
Up next, we learn about the many hardships the American colony faced and the colony's lasting impact on the land of Israel today. Stick around.
With over 3.5 million members, Christians United for Israel is the largest pro-Israel organization in America. And for Zion's sake, we will not remain silent. We won't stand for the lies and political attacks that threaten Israel's safety and the future of the Jewish people in their God-given homeland. We want you to join us in this sacred movement.
The Jewish people are not alone. Christians United for Israel, I want to thank you for standing up for Israel. I want to thank you for standing up and being counted. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Israel needs you to take a stand. Join Christians United for Israel. Make your voice heard and be remembered as a defender of Israel, the apple of God's eye.
The original settlers were really very serious in their faith. They were Bible believers. The leader, George Adams, had brought forth the scriptures particularly from the Hebrew scriptures, that the land was promised and that it would bloom like a rose. The desert would bloom like a rose. And they were able to make this distinction, I think, to come from their place where even the life there was not easy, but to go to another place where they had no knowledge of the languages or the climate or anything, and try their very best to help fulfill the scriptures. And that's what they wanted to do. And we have that, particularly the women were very faithful, and some of them actually stayed with their children, and a couple of them, their husbands went back to Maine, and they stayed. They said, "This is what I believe in, and I'm staying right here." When they first got here, I think the first problem that they had was to get fresh water. They were on the beach and there's no water there, and unfortunately they camped nearby a cemetery where people had been buried of a recent plague, and that contributed to some of the problems that now we know how to handle this, but back then they didn't. There were some troubles more, I would say, with the Ottoman government. The Turkish government at that time was in charge, and I think even the locals didn't really get along well with the Turkish government. So that was part of their problem. Even their doctor died within the first 6 months. So they had these real difficult challenges of just the health. But once they were able to get up here to the neighborhood and have their houses, because these were orange groves, they had freshwater wells here. They had their own fresh water, and that took care of that problem. There were a couple of seasons that were not good for natural problems, not enough rain or too much at the wrong time, and their harvest wasn't as plentiful as it needed to be. And therefore, some of the families who were really going to be sustaining themselves through that didn't have enough to eat. Some of them started starving. They got sick and weak. They couldn't work elsewhere, and they were not able to continue, and they were invited to come back. Unfortunately, there was another group that was supposed to come on the second year, and they heard that it was difficult and they canceled. And they didn't send more money or more food or more seed, which is something they could have maybe done. They just canceled and then started talking about how difficult life was here. And so some of the people came back, some got help from outsiders, some got help a little bit from the government, the United States government, and they were able to come back. But there were a number of families who stayed here, and they did exactly what George Adams had wanted to do. His plan was to help develop the country and develop many things here that would help and would encourage more Jewish people to come. One thing they did do was bring kerosene. They were the first to bring kerosene to this country. Some of the people here helped build the road between Jaffa and Jerusalem, which is a very unusual thing. It was the first road since Roman times, basically. Also, the Suez Canal opened in 1869. The walls of Jaffa were opened also because it started growing so much. And so people started coming, and the little hotels that they made here in the neighborhood started having guests. And that's what some of the people planned to do, was to make little hotels, and they succeeded in that. And little by little, the land, they integrated into a developing country, and they were able to participate in that. With so many people coming, Rollo Floyd also then developed tourism, and he became known as the father of group tourism in Israel. This was a prayer that George Adams gave when he first came to the land, before the people came. And he starts out, "O Lord God of Israel, thou great Jehovah, God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, and of the prophets." And he says, "We have seen the afflictions of the people and witnessed the abuse and heard the groanings and seen the oppression of thy covenant people. O Lord, have mercy upon them. Deliver them from oppression and sorrow. Turn all nations in their favor." In fact, he continues here saying, "O Lord, those nations and churches who oppose and oppress Israel, let confusion, darkness, and destruction come upon them. For in thy word thou hast said, the nation and kingdom which will not help them shall perish. And now, O Lord of hosts, have mercy upon thy servants who have come this long journey to perform this work. Forgive our sins and purify our hearts. Give us faith and courage to persevere and hold out to the end and never falter or deny the faith." So he was powerful. And this was what he brought to the people, and they absorbed this and became part of them, and they never let it go.
Thanks again to Jean Carter for sharing the story of the American colony of Jaffa. It's a hidden gem and a great story that every supporter of Israel should know. The next time you're in Israel, take the time to visit the Maine Friendship House in Jaffa, just a stone's throw from Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport. You won't regret it. Well, coming up after the break, we focused on some very important history this week, and when we come back, I'll share my final thoughts on what it all means for you. It's the Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel, only right here on TBN. Stick around. Welcome to Jerusalem, where every week on the Watchman Show, we are bringing you the inside story of Israel and how it affects you. From security threats like Iran and ISIS to amazing biblical history to stories of Israel fulfilling its destiny as a light unto the nations, our team at Christians United for Israel is committed to bringing you the truth about God's land. Join us every Friday night exclusively on TBN as we set the record straight on what's really happening right here in the Middle East. For Zion's sake, we will not remain silent. And welcome back. Folks, I think of the amazing history we learned on the show today. Stories of British and American Christians who felt that tug towards Israel long ago. And I'm reminded of the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 2. It says, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it." What that verse is saying is that believers from all nations will one day stream to Jerusalem to give glory to God. He will dwell there, and it'll be like a gravitational tug on their hearts. Folks, our team at Christians United for Israel feels that tug in a mighty way. We are one of the world's largest pro-Israel organizations with over 3.6 million members, and we want you to join us. You see the website and telephone number on your screen, so contact us today and put your faith into action. Be a part of the amazing miracles that God is working in Israel today for Zion's sake. Well, thanks for joining us this week on The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.